how do we end corruption in our politics? Welcome to Future Hindsight, where we take big ideas in civic life and democracy and turn them into action items for you and me. Because democracy is not a spectator sport. Tomorrow starts right now. I'm Mila Atmos. Our guest today is Tiffany Muller. She's the president of End Citizens United, Let America Vote, and the End Citizens United, Let America Vote Action Fund. The organization's mission is to fix our democracy by getting big money out of politics and protecting the right to vote. 16 years ago, the Supreme Court decided to open the floodgates to unlimited money pouring into our elections. Concerns about corruption at the highest levels of government are growing louder with each passing election cycle, and the stakes today have never been higher. And before we start, if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent podcast, please leave us a review on your podcast app. Whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere in between, it really goes a long way. Thank you. Welcome, Tiffany. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So let's start with the basics, because the Supreme Court decided Citizens United versus FEC in 2010. That's a long time ago now. And I think in the public's mind, it's simply that Citizens United was quote unquote bad. But many of us don't know exactly why. So what exactly is the Citizens United decision?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it was January 2010, and the Supreme Court decided Citizens United versus the FEC in a 5-4 ruling that was driven by the conservative majority. And the decision really overturned 100 years of precedent that had kept corporations from being able to spend unlimited amounts of money in our elections. And basically with this decision, they took kind of two really terrible ideas and merged them together. And they said money equals speech and corporations are people. And it overturned that 100 years of precedent. And what we've seen as a result is really corporations and billionaires gaining the right to spend unlimited money to flood our elections and to influence both elections and the policy outcomes. And so, not to overwhelm folks with stats, but I'll give one to just kind of show the scope of what we're talking about. Prior to Citizens United, billionaires spent $16 million in the 2008 election cycle. And y'all will remember that was when President Obama was elected. It was a very expensive election cycle. Billionaires spent $16 million. In 2024, billionaires spent $2.6 billion. That's 162 times more. And to think of it this way, if billionaires were spending $1 million a day, in 2008, it would have only taken them 16 days to reach the amount that they ended up donating. But in 2024, it would have taken them 7 years. That's the kind of scope and scale of money that we are talking about. And basically what this has done is drowned out the voices of everyday working Americans and made them feel further and further disconnected from their government, while the government and elected officials have been more and more responsive to the donors and the corporations who are footing the campaign bills.
Well, thank you for giving us this scope, because I think that's also very difficult to understand for most people exactly how much more money is being spent and how. And I really want to get into how this decision has impacted our lives. You mentioned how it's impacted policymaking. But before I get there, I want to ask another sort of framing, grounding question about corruption, because we commonly understand corruption as the abuse of public office for personal gain. But I do also think that we commonly understand that Citizens United has had a corrupting effect, and that may be less obvious. How would you explain it?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think that there is the quid pro quo type of corruption that we obviously have seen, but where someone is handing over like a bag of cash and the elected official is either profiting and putting that in their own pocket in exchange for some kind of official action. But there is also this corrupting influence of money that has skewed the entire system away from the needs of people and more focused on the needs of the richest people in America or the biggest corporations. And it's why we have also seen so much gridlock and dysfunction in our system over the last 15 years. So I'll give a couple of examples. Just this past year, we obviously saw the reconciliation bill, which gave a $5 trillion tax cut to the wealthiest Americans and to the biggest corporations, but at the same time actually ended up raising costs for the lower 50% of Americans and ripped healthcare subsidies away from tens of millions of Americans. Those are policy choices that are being made day in and day out because the entire system has now been corrupted and allows this kind of soft corruption where money is buying access, but it's also buying influence, where lobbyists are helping write the laws, and where there is far more time being spent on making sure that the folks who have been giving the checks and funding the campaigns are getting what they want out of policy rather than what the American people need. And in the last election cycle, I think this became even more brazen. In 2024, we saw Trump at one point actually tell oil and gas CEOs, if you give our campaign $1 billion, I'll make sure that you get what you want for your company's profit. And they didn't give a full billion, but they gave $300 million. And they're being repaid with things like opening up federal lands for more drilling, with energy executives installed at both EPA and the Department of Energy, with this idea that maybe they can take oil out of Venezuela to help their company's profits. So you can see the kind of payback that is happening through official government actions and how it's connected to campaign finance.
Right, yeah. Well, these are great examples to show how policy making has been captured by big money as opposed to policy making being written for the public good. So you just mentioned that Citizens United has upended campaign finance laws. How has this decision affected elections? And you've just mentioned how much more money is being spent. But really, what does all the money do that's being spent?
I firmly believe that elections are supposed to be about two candidates or however many candidates signing up to say, here is who I am, here is what I believe, and here is how I would tackle our biggest problems. And campaigns used to be far more rooted in communities. You would see candidates doing town halls. You would see candidates doing house parties. You would see candidates knocking on doors, making phone calls. And now what we have seen is that because of all of the increase in spending, that about 75% of campaign spending is actually coming not from the candidate themselves, but from these outside interest groups. And what that's allowed is actually this disconnection between the candidate and their constituents and their voters. So you see more and more where people are just avoiding doing debates. They're avoiding doing press. They're avoiding doing town halls. They're avoiding house parties. They're avoiding door knocking. Anything where they can be asked kind of live questions and where we can really interrogate what they believe and what their priorities would be. And then they just rely on these outside spending sources to flood the airwaves and flood your mailboxes with ads and with mailers in order to try to get the vote. And we've seen that be an ever-increasing problem over the last 15 years, and I think we're on record for this midterm election cycle to see that continue. We are actually projected to see about $2.8 billion spent in Senate races, and the House spending is projected to be over $2 billion for the first time in history. So this is going to be a massive amount of money flooding in, even for a midterm election. And once again, you're going to see candidates who are more connected to the money than they are the people.
Right. So I think it's a good time to ask about what are PACs, what are super PACs, how do they work in collecting the money and distributing it? And in that context, I also want to know, you're saying they're spending so much money on flyers, on ads, et cetera, as opposed to meeting people at their doors or in town hall meetings. So how effective is this money in influencing election outcomes? But first, do some definitional stuff about what's a political action committee, what's a super PAC, how are they different?
So a super PAC can take unlimited money from an individual who wants to donate to influence a specific election. So let's break this down. You're running for office, and I want to support you. I can give money directly to your campaign, but I am capped in the amount that I can give you. I can give you $3,300 for your primary campaign, and I can give you $3,300 for your general election campaign, which means I think you're great, you're going to win, but I'm going to give you $6,600. And the reason that candidate contributions are capped is exactly to combat the kind of corruption that we are talking about and making sure that candidates aren't overly biased toward folks who can give even more money. Now, here's the thing. You've also set up what we call a super PAC, a single candidate super PAC. You're supposed to not have anything to do with it, but what we see time and time again is that these are being set up with the blessing of the candidate and with close associates of the candidate. So a lot of times it's a former chief of staff or it's a former campaign manager who is running these super PACs. They can take unlimited money. So I like you, you're running for office, I've given you your $6,600. I'm now going to go give $10 million to that super PAC to go do ads or whatever they have decided makes the most sense to help get you elected. Now, again, what the Supreme Court said is that these things would be totally independent of each other. Therefore, you, the candidate, couldn't be corrupted by me giving $10 million to a super PAC because, in theory, you're not even supposed to know that I did that. But here's the thing. Of course we know that that independence isn't actually there. We know that too often candidates and campaigns are coordinating directly with the super PACs, and they definitely know how much folks are giving. The greatest example of this, I think, is Elon Musk in the last election cycle with Donald Trump. He put $290 million into a super PAC and basically ran the entire ground operation for the Trump campaign, and then was rewarded, of course, with a powerful position in the government and one that he could continue to push no bid contracts for his businesses. So super PACs can take unlimited money. They're supposed to be independent, but that's not the reality of how they work. Then there's one more definition, dark money groups. These are 501c4s normally, and they are supposed to be doing social welfare work that is good for the benefit of our communities and our people. And these have been taken over, and actually they're doing a lot of political work, but they're able to hide who their donors are. So this is how billions of dollars are actually getting into our elections in an undisclosed fashion. So we don't know where the money's coming from. Is it corporations that are giving it? Is it billionaires that want to stay hidden? Sometimes we know that there's even been foreign money that's gotten into our elections through these efforts. And so more and more, we don't even know where the money is coming from that's influencing these elections.
I have a quick question here. I thought that a super PAC is a 501c4. Is that not correct?
That's not correct. They're actually separate. Super PACs are a 527 officially, and filed and kind of managed by the Federal Elections Commission, whereas 501c4s, you file with the IRS.
Ah, fascinating. I have misunderstood this all this time. So then what's what's a plain PAC as opposed to a super PAC? Because I think these things are being thrown around all the time in casual conversation, and it assumes that whoever you're talking to understands the difference between a super PAC, a PAC, and a 501c4.
And there's no reason that the average American should know the difference of these at all. A plain pack, what is also kind of colloquial called a hard pack, that is an organization that can coordinate with a candidate, but it's because they limit the contributions that they can get from an individual. We at End Citizens United are actually a hard pack. We cannot accept more than $5,000 from any individual, but it means that we can actually work with candidates in order to help them run on reforming a broken system and talking about money in politics and how these issues are impacting voters across the country. So if you're a super PAC, you're not supposed to be talking to candidates at all. A hard PAC, you can, but you can't take unlimited money. And the 501c4s, you can take unlimited money and you don't disclose the donors.
Fantastic. This is really good to know. So there are, of course, several solutions to combat this hodgepodge of money coming into these elections. And there is already a patchwork of activity across the country. Many states have tried to enact laws to mitigate corporate spending, like in Montana with a ballot initiative in this election cycle called the Transparent Election Initiative, which aims to restrict the ability of corporations to spend in elections. But actually, Congress can do something about this kind of money in politics run amok. And one of the active bills is the Disclose Act. Tell us more about how the Disclose Act would work.
Yeah, so the Disclose Act would make sure that if you're spending more than $10,000 to influence an election, that your donors have to be disclosed and transparent. And so this is going after those 501c4s we were just talking about, those dark money groups. Because look, those groups were not set up to be a political avenue. And the Supreme Court has upheld time and time again that if you are trying to influence an election, voters need to be able to trace back where your money is coming from in order to be able to root out kind of that corrupting influence and to be able to just evaluate who is spending this money and why might they be in this election. So the Disclose Act simply would say, if you are spending more than $10,000 to influence an election, you have to disclose your donors. There are some states who have done something very similar to this. And what we've seen in those states is actually that after you pass strict disclosure and transparency laws, some of the outside spending actually gets out of the race. People don't want their spending to always be known, so a lot of times it has actually tamped down the amount of spending that we are seeing in these races. So would it solve everything? No, but could we trace more of the money? Yes. And we could look for corrupting influence, call it out, make sure that voters knew about it. And I actually think that we would see less outside spending if every dollar had to be disclosed. And like you said, this is a simple, first of all, this is supported by like 85% of Americans. Everyone thinks we need disclosure and transparency. This is not some radical idea. This is very common sense to people. Whether you are Republican, Independent, Democrat, doesn't matter. People think we need disclosure and accountability and transparency. We could pass this tomorrow with a vote in Congress. It has been on the agenda since 2012 and has been blocked every single year by the filibuster in the Senate. We've passed it multiple times through the House, but we've never managed to get it through the Senate. And while it is bipartisan across America, right now it is not bipartisan on Capitol Hill. And we need to continue to keep pushing to get common sense measures like this passed.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about the gap between what everyday American people want and what our elected representatives are doing instead.
Yeah, the American people want to feel like their government's working for them. And right now they don't, right? They think the system is rigged. They think it's working real well for people at the top. They think they are being left further and further behind. And they are both angry about it and they feel powerless about it. And it's why we have seen them vote for change election cycle after election cycle after election cycle. And honestly, even Donald Trump leaned into these messages, especially in the 2016 campaign with his drain the swamp motto, in order to really capture the angst that Americans feel at their government right now. So most of the reforms that we talk about, enjoy 80 to 90% support from Americans. And again, then Democrats, Republicans, independents. But on Capitol Hill, sadly, this has become a partisan issue. Right now, the Republican Party won't even join on to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. They won't join on to do things like make sure we have disclosure and accountability. There are very few issues that we are working on that are truly bipartisan. We have seen some progress around the stock trading ban, where you have both Republicans and Democrats pushing for that. And to me, that's, again, a no-brainer. If you're a member of Congress, you should not be trading stocks to profit off of and using your insider knowledge in order to make a profit. And that's where the American people are at, too. So there's a whole lot we could do with a simple vote of Congress if we had the right people in office, or if the people in office were actually being responsive to the people. So we could reform the Federal Elections Commission and make sure we had a real cop on the beat. We could stop that coordination between candidates and super PACs that we were talking about. We could have disclosure and transparency. We could make sure that the Supreme Court actually had to follow ethics reform and had a gift ban in place. There is so much that we could do tomorrow, but right now, Republicans are blocking all progress on this issue.
We'll be back with Tiffany in just a moment, so stick around. You'll want to hear this episode's Civic Spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. But first, picture this. It's late at night and you're doing a little scrolling when all of a sudden you see it, that one product that you've been looking for. You click on the link, add to cart, maybe even shop around a little bit more before finally hitting checkout. But as you're filling in your address, you realize you don't have your card anywhere near you. And that's when you see it, that purple pay button that has all of your information saved, making checking out as simple as a simple tap of your screen. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States, from household names like Momofuku to up-and-coming brands that are just getting started. And Shopify is there for you, too. Accelerate your efficiency, whether you're uploading new products or trying to improve existing ones. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Now, you might be wondering, what if people haven't heard about my brand? It's okay. Shopify helps you find customers with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. So, tackle all those important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. Everything is all in one spot, making your life easier and your business operations smoother. What I love about Shopify is how, no matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. See fewer carts go abandoned and more sales go cha-ching with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/hopeful. Go to shopify.com/hopeful. That's shopify.com/hopeful. And now, let's return to my conversation with Tiffany Muller. Well, it is a midterm election cycle, and at End Citizens United, your organization, you have a program called Unrig Washington. What are the goals of Unrig Washington?
We think it matters who's elected to office, and we know how powerful these issues are with the voters across America. And look, the Unrig Washington commitment is really pretty common sense. It's 3 simple things. Number 1, ban stock trading. We just talked about it, but we know that there are too many members of Congress who are using information that they've gotten through their position to then go do selling or trading of individual stocks to make a profit for themselves. That is just wrong. Being in Congress is a public service. we need to ban stock trading. Number 2, don't take corporate PAC money. Look, this is pretty simple. Corporations already have a big enough seat at the table. The American people need to know that their elected officials are working for them and not for the big corporate PAC dollars. And so these folks have agreed not to take corporate PAC money as a signal and a sign to their voters that they are working for them and not the corporations. And number 3 is get rid of the dark money. So pass the Disclose Act. Make sure that the spending in our elections is disclosed and transparent and can be traced back to where it came from. These are 3 really common sense ideas, and we're really proud. We already have over 140 candidates that have signed up for Unrig Washington, that are running on it day in and day out. I have been traveling the country and joining them for town halls, and I will tell you that one of the biggest applause lines every time is around ending stock trading and overturning Citizens United. The people out there are tired of this broken system, and they want to elect people who are going to come to Washington and change it.
Yes, totally agree. Totally agree. We should ban stock trading. Actually, even my children who are young adults are complaining about this. And, like everybody knows that's corrupting, right? Like if you're lining your own pockets, as we mentioned earlier, for personal gain, there's something deeply wrong. It's very exciting. You have all these candidates who have already signed on. How much bipartisan support are you getting for this? I'm going to guess none, but I'm really curious because, like you said, Americans across the spectrum want to end this kind of corruptive behavior.
Right now, there is not a ton of Republicans who have signed on to these things.
But there are some?
I was actually just trying to think, are there any? And I don't think there's anyone that's doing all 3. There are folks. Believe it or not, Josh Hawley in Missouri is trying to
He's against stock trading.
He's against stock trading.
Yes.
He wasn't taking corporate PAC money. I don't know if he has still upheld that or not, but he had stopped taking corporate PAC money. And he had even introduced an amendment to overturn Citizens United. So there are actually some folks who are seeing the power behind this and who are understanding that we need to make changes. But for the most part, this is still a very split partisan issue. But again, not because that's where the American people are at. The American people view this as nonpartisan. Republicans, independents, Democrats are all for all of these things. But right now, the Republican Party has decided that they benefit from the big money, that they do better when more unlimited money is allowed into the system, frankly, because more of the corporate special interest and the billionaires have actually aligned with the Republican Party. So an example, oil and gas, I think it's right around $180 million last cycle, and 90% of that went to benefit the Republicans in the elections. The top 10 donors did a combined $1.7 billion into our elections last cycle. 7 of those 10 supported Republicans exclusively. So I think that what they are seeing right now is that their incentives align more with protecting the big money. And so I think we have to make sure that the American people understand that that is the choice being made and are taking that knowledge into the ballot box, because I do think that as we continue to make this an issue that people aren't just concerned about but are voting on, then that begins to change behavior here on Capitol Hill as well. If they think that they're going to lose votes because of their stance on this, then they will change their stance on this, because getting reelected is always the most important thing to almost all elected officials.
Yes, it is. They want to get reelected and stay in office. So, of course, as we have already mentioned multiple times here, it's a midterm election year. And I'm curious about how you think about what the stakes are. And since we are a pro-democracy show, I mean, of course, for American democracy, but also more specifically for your efforts to end Citizens United.
Yeah, I think that we are in a crisis moment in our country. I think we are seeing it day in and day out, whether it is the atrocities that we have seen perpetrated by ICE and CBP across the country, the federal government overreach, the weaponization of federal agencies like the DOJ. But on top of that, the brazen corruption, right? We have never had an administration that has used the White House and the executive power to line their own pockets like we are seeing right now. President Trump's personal net wealth has increased. Some estimate $3 billion, some estimate $5 billion, but billions of dollars that he has gained just since he was elected in 2024. And we're seeing it with like ballroom donors who are paying millions of dollars to get investigations dropped, to get mergers passed through, to get pardons passed. We essentially have a pay-to-play government right now. And it is destroying the very fundamental notion of our American democracy and what it stands for. So every election, we say it's the most important election cycle. I think that we are seeing in very real time what a crisis moment we are in as a country and why everyone needs to make sure that they are registered to vote, that they have a plan to vote, that they are going to get their friends and family to vote. But we need everyone in this fight. And for our issues, it is literally the difference of continuing to see big money run amok and seeing this corruption continue unchecked and unscathed, or are we going to actually get folks into office who want and will pass real meaningful reforms and begin to claw back some of the power for the people instead of just the big money? Right now, we essentially have a government that's working for the smallest handful of corporations and billionaires that have concentrated the mass amount of wealth and power in our country. And that is not what American democracy is about.
Yes, especially the president, who is probably lining his pockets most
with
egregiously.
Billions. With billions.
With billions. With billions.
I mean, I really think he is just plundering our government, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Well, I think I want to make sure that people understand here when you're saying he's plundering our government, he's stealing our money, yours and mine,
That's
the
right.
taxpayers.
That's exactly right. And he is giving it to both himself and to his closest cronies, right? And it is hurting everyday Americans. It's hurting them by keeping grocery prices high, by driving up energy prices, by keeping pharmaceutical prices high, by not addressing any of the pressing policy issues that Americans are facing, whether it's housing costs or childcare costs. You know, people are struggling, and we do not lack for wealth and resource in this country. Mm-hmm. We lack for morality, and they have chosen to keep that all in the hands of a few rather than helping the country as a whole. And I believe in, the tide lifts all boats, right? We all do better when we all do better.
Yes. So every week on Future Hindsight, I ask my guest to share a civic spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. What's a good way to turn the insights that you've shared with us into action?
Oh, I love this question. This is wonderful. It's hard to pick just one.
Okay, give me two.
I have to say, a lot of people will ask me how I keep having hope doing this work. And I keep having hope because I get to spend a lot of time traveling the country and talking to people who are passionate about saving our country. And so the two things I would say is, number one, go to town halls, go to the rallies, go be with people, particularly if there are opportunities to ask questions and hold elected officials of any party to account. Courage is contagious, and I think that being in community and being in the room together really, really matters. I know I have been inspired every single one I go to, and will continue to be inspired as I travel the country doing them. The other is we recently started an organizing effort through End Citizens United where we have volunteers writing postcards to voters in key states. And there are lots of ways to help get out the vote in these primaries that are coming up. So writing postcards, making phone calls, doing text banks. And we are happy to connect folks with campaigns and with the right people or with our efforts. And you can find us at endcitizensunited.com. But whatever it is, working to try to make sure that we are getting as many people out to the ballot box as possible, both for the primaries and for the November general, is really important.
Yes, definitely agree. So I always ask this question at the end, looking into the future, what makes you hopeful? And you've just mentioned that for you to go to town halls and meeting people makes you hopeful, but maybe you can be more specific. What is it that you encounter there that makes you hopeful?
I feel like the question that we get the most at these town halls is people will stand up and they will say, I'm doing the phone banks, I'm writing the letters, I'm calling my member of Congress. And they always ask, what else can I do? And that gives me a great deal of hope because people are not done fighting. They want to fight for this country and the beliefs and values that so many of us share about this country and the greatness that this country can have. And I see that not just passion, but determination, this unwillingness to let the other side take our country without a fight. And that gives me hope because I believe that more of us all share the same value around what this country is supposed to stand for and how it's supposed to treat people. And I believe that the people joining together is more powerful than any other force in our country. And so we have seen this country make huge strides in short amount of time in the past. I often talk about the fact that I kind of got my start in politics doing LGBTQ work in Topeka, Kansas, of all places. And I remember in 2004 when the anti-gay marriage amendments were passed in 30 states, and just 9 years later, the Supreme Court was overturning the Defense of Marriage Act, and 2 years after that, making marriage equality the law of the land. That was very rapid change in our country. So it can happen, it does happen, but it never happens without people pulling together and fighting for change together. And so that is what gives me hope.
Yes, hear, hear. Collective action is really powerful. Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. This was great.
Tiffany Muller is the president of End Citizens United, Let America Vote, and the End Citizens United, Let America Vote Action Fund. Remember, civic action doesn't have to be complicated. It's about small steps that spark progress, like sharing this episode with a friend. Let's recap this week's Civic Spark and fire up our collective power. Go to town halls, go to rallies, go be in community with people who are holding elected officials accountable. Being in the room really matters, and if you want to spread that outreach a little further, you can make phone calls or send postcards to voters in other states. Next week on Future Hindsight, we'll be joined by Jane Perlez. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and the host of Face Off, an award-winning podcast that gives an inside look at the turbulent relationship between the world's two superpowers, China and the United States. That's next time on Future Hindsight. Now, be sure to follow us on your podcast app and leave us a review. And if you're listening on your browser, you can find Future Hindsight on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast app. We're here to build your civic action toolkit every week. So follow Future Hindsight now, and we'll come right to you. And if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent, pro-democracy podcast, consider subscribing to the Civics Club on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/Future Hindsight now to join. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. This episode was produced by Zack Travis and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,